Spotlight.
This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on BRICS meeting of the Environment Working Group on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. The participants are Mukul Sanwal, environmentalist, and Anubha Rohatgi, anchor.
India is hosting the 12th BRICS Environment Ministers meeting this year. As part of the two-day event, the BRICS Senior Officers meeting of the Environment Working Group and Contact Group on Climate Change and Sustainable Development was held today, while the Environment Ministers meeting will be held tomorrow, August 18th. Noted environmentalist Mukul Sanwal joins me to discuss the significance of the event and related issues. Mr. Sanwal, welcome to Akashvani's Spotlight program. Mr. Sanwal, the theme of the BRICS Environment Working Group meeting under India's chairship this year is Building for Resilience, Innovation, Cooperation and Sustainability. What is the significance of this meeting and India's chairship of it?
You see, chairship of a meeting, of an intergovernmental meeting, means that you can set the agenda. So when you set the agenda, it gives you two advantages. One is that you have an opportunity to shape the agenda in the sense that you can put forward your priorities and get others to accept your priorities in a small group like the BRICS, which can then be taken to the larger meeting of the entire body of intergovernmental climate change or sustainable development, and you advance your agenda in that manner. So there is a challenge to get others to accept. So you have to prepare an agenda which is acceptable to others. It cannot be an agenda that is your own agenda. That is one. The second thing is that it gives you an opportunity to share your ideas with a small group, and you can then see what part of your agenda or your national priorities are acceptable to others and where you need to modify. So in a forum like BRICS, we see both of these things happening. In the officials meeting, it is clear that India set a very ambitious agenda, and only some part of it has been accepted by others. But that itself is a huge success, because it means that all these countries, 11 countries which are major countries, will support your stand in the international fora. So when you speak in the international fora, you will not be speaking only as India. You will be speaking as chairing the BRICS group for this year and having the support of a large number of other countries.
For this year's EWG meeting, 4 priority areas have been identified. 1. Promoting sustainable lifestyles. 2. Afforestation, forest fire management and disaster resilience. 3. Circular economy. And 4. Adaptation. Can you tell us more about these 4 priority areas?
I will start with adaptation, because the entire debate in climate change and sustainability has been the Western countries, that is the G7 countries, who are responsible for these problems, really focused the international community, the science community, the political diplomatic community towards reducing emissions of carbon dioxide.
Yes.
So their entire effort was that while we have created the problem, when they develop, that is India and others develop, they should develop in a different manner, but they never told us what that different manner would be. They didn't ask us that how much can you do, how much should you do, what you can do. They simply said that the outcome of whatever you do should be something that reduces emissions of carbon dioxide. How you do it is not our concern, but it must be done. Now, at that time in 1990, India, China and others were not very powerful. Now we have become a global powers and we can say no. So the real significance of this BRICS meeting is that India is telling the group of 11 other countries, 10 other countries including India, and major developing countries with a substantial share of the economy, now global economy, that look, we need to shift the focus from mitigation to adaptation. Now, countries have been saying this right since 1990. But it is for the first time, I think, in an organized manner that an agenda is being set, that this is the new agenda. Right. It is not simply saying that we shift from mitigation to adaptation, but here is an agenda. And that agenda, as you have said, focuses on the circular economy, where India is very strong. Traditionally, we have not been a wasteful economy.
Yes.
The amount of use of waste paper or the amount of use of things that are thrown away, whether it is food items, whether it is clothing, whether it is even cars. Most of the steel that is produced in developed countries today is recycled steel, recycled cars. So they design products in a manner that they need to be replaced, they need to be recycled or thrown away. Now a lot of that throwing away is being done in developing countries. Shiploads will come. But India has never been in that situation throughout civilization, including now. So India has put itself as an example that here is an alternative way of living. You can have the same standard of living and not waste. So that is one major shift. Prime Minister has been talking of life, and he has been saying this in an isolated or as an individualized manner. Now it is expected to become part of the entire declaration of BRIC countries that this is important. Thirdly, we are saying that look, let us focus on forestry. Not directly focus on forestry, but look upon the wildfire hazards which are raging in Europe.
Yes, absolutely.
And which are taking place here as well. But United States, Canada, Europe are having a serious problem of wildfires. So we hope that this will have some resonance with them. It will be acceptable to the others also. And here the focus of India is to share technical knowledge on how to deal with this. Now India is very strong in this. We have a very strong forest department, probably the strongest forest department in all India service of any country in the world. Then we are also looking at traditional knowledge. So what India is saying is that adaptation is not adapting to climate change. Adaptation should really be looking into traditional knowledge, looking into local communities. Because what has also happened in the world is that in Europe and North America, 80% of the population has shifted to cities. It is about 60-65% in China. But in other developing countries, more than half the people do not live in cities. So we cannot ignore them. So India is trying to link that. And lastly, what India is saying is that all of this should be fair and people-centered. It should not be centered in terms of emissions or some technology, but people should be at the forefront. And the expectation is that at the official level, a lot of this will be acceptable.
Now, the 4 priority areas that we have just discussed and you've explained so very well in detail, what is the relevance of these areas for the BRIC groups of nations? How do they reflect the common environmental challenges faced by the countries of this bloc?
You see, here we come into the politics of the issue. Because the major countries that are in the BRICS is India, which is rapidly growing, China, which has reached levels of well-being of the West, and then you have Brazil, a huge country, but which the entire power generation is from hydro, and they use ethanol and not petrol. And they are exporters of oil. And then of course Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are worried about their oil and gas exports. So
we also have Ethiopia. And
yes, but they are not that economically powerful as these people are. Even Russia. But Russia has a very strange relationship because it is actually a developed country.
Yes.
But it is part of BRICS. It is looking towards Asia. But they also have large tracts of forest. I think they are the country with the largest forests in the world because it's a huge country.
Yes.
I think it stretches across 4 or 5 time zones. So what has happened is that from the information that is available, the technical aspects will find more resonance or more acceptability. Not so much the political aspects. For example, the mindful consumption will be acceptable. Because it is in the interest of everybody. Do not waste. Think before you throw away things. Secondly, we need to look at wildfires in terms of sharing technology. It is not how you do the deal with the wildfires because every country has their own condition, but sharing technology. Then the traditional knowledge, traditional communities are important in every country. Even Saudi Arabia has people living in the deserts. And it is this sharing of technical knowledge, sharing of data and information which I think is going to be a concrete outcome. And that is important because it leads to operationalization of the decision. It is not just a decision has been taken, it has to be operationalized, it has to be implemented. And I think that's where this is going to be successful.
Now, during the Environment Ministers meeting last year in Brazil, where the 11th edition took place, India had urged BRICS partners to strengthen climate financing mechanisms to meet global sustainability commitments effectively. How important is this issue of climate financing for developing countries and what role can the BRICS play in this?
You see, for the major developing countries, I just listed out to you India, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia. The issue is not so much the amount of finance. It is that it should be the terms of finance are more important. So 2 things India has said. India has said the terms should be fair. It should not be something that is imposed. You should not give us money and ask us to do something in return. You should provide it on fair terms, which means beneficial to both sides. But in addition to these 4 or 5 major countries, major economically viable countries, there are a large number of other developing countries, more than 150. Now, for them, the quantity of finance is important. because even a small amount of international finance as grant is a high percentage of their budget. So India has laid down both aspects, fair finance and a certain quantity of the finance. The outcome is likely to be more towards fair finance rather than an identified quantity. But it is important to have finance there to keep the countries together, to keep not just the BRICS blocks, but the entire group of developing countries together.
Now, BRICS countries, as we were just discussing right now, have very different levels of economic development, energy needs and climate vulnerabilities. How can the group reconcile these differences while developing a common environmental agenda?
You see, the common environmental agenda will focus on urbanization as well as rural areas, because the entire group of BRICS, and they are speaking on behalf of a large number of other countries.
Yes.
Ultimately, the objective is they are speaking on behalf of the other countries in the major negotiation.
And
at the international
as the
level.
voice of the global south as well.
Voice of the global south, as you very rightly put. So the idea will be that you take part of the agenda which is relevant for urbanization, urban cities, and part for rural areas. But you leave out some parts of an agenda which some people have very strong views. For example, the West is saying you phase out fossil fuels. Now Saudi Arabia and UAE have very strong views on that. So does India, so does Russia, so does China. But these people, their entire existence of prosperity depends on exporting LNG and fossil fuels.
Yes.
So you have to be very cautious in that you don't talk about, for example, China is pushing solar and wind, but that goes entirely against Saudi Arabia's view that some fossil fuel must be sold in the world, because otherwise we go back to the desert. So there will be some balancing, and the balancing will appear not in terms of what the West has saying, phase out of fossil fuel or stop emissions. The balancing will emerge in terms of the degree of urbanization and the degree of rural areas that people have. And part of the agenda that India has put forward will be acceptable to everybody, because everybody has cities, everybody has rural populations.
Right. What can India's own climate and sustainability initiatives offer to other BRICS nations?
You see, as Prime Minister has repeatedly said, the lifestyle issue is something that India is offering and can offer and has offered repeatedly. Prime Minister, among the first global leaders to raise the issue of consumption. He said the issue is not about fossil fuels. The issue is how you use that energy. Right. And let us start using it in a more frugal manner. Now here is the big difference between India and China. China has reached levels of well-being of the West at much lower fossil fuel use. But India, our carbon emissions are below the global average. So in that sense, we are an example to the entire world that you can grow not using less energy, but much less energy.
Right.
Even less energy than China has used.
While chairing the senior officers meeting today, Mr. Tanmay Kumar, who is Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, he said that BRICS has evolved over the past 2 decades from an economic dialogue into an increasingly influential platform addressing major global environmental challenges, including pollution, biodiversity loss and global warming. How do you see this evolution of the BRICS bloc vis-a-vis the environmental challenges?
You see, the origin of BRICS goes down to Russia suggesting to India and China, RICS, that we should get together. Now, they were concerned about sanctions. So it started on a finance note that we need to look into how, when we use the dollar or the foreign exchange mechanisms, we are put under pressure. So that is how this conversation started. Then, as it evolved, some aspects of security came in, because ultimately the use of the dollar or the international exchange mechanisms are linked to national security.
Yes.
Because the idea of what is national security itself evolved. Now what has happened is that the entire concept of national security not being just the army, navy and air force, it is also the economy and the environment. Because without that environmental base, there will be economic growth is not going to be possible. So the entire thinking has evolved in the world in a sense, and BRICS are leading that process, because BRICS are in the forefront of developing countries that are emerging as developed countries.
Mr. Mukul Sanwal, thank you so much for joining us in Akashvani's Spotlight program and sharing your views on this issue.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on BRICS meeting of the Environment Working Group on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. The participants were Mukul Sanwal, environmentalist, and Anubha Rohatgi, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.
Spotlight.